The Creative Psychotherapist is the official podcast of the Creative Clinicians Corner, a practice-building resource for creative psychotherapists. TCP Podcast is the cast for creative, expressive, and experiential-focused psychotherapists curious to learn how to design, build, and scale a thriving private practice. Your host, Raina Lombardi, interviews successful therapists about the tools and strategies they have used to develop creative, focused practices. They also talk about the products, services, and side hustles they have developed using their knowledge and creativity to enhance their therapy practices, make a greater impact in their communities, and diversify their income streams. Welcome. Now here's your host, Raina Lombardi.
Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Creative Psychotherapist podcast. It's our first podcast in quite a while because I've been very inconsistent with podcasting. I've had so many other things going on. The podcast has not been my primary focus as of late, but I'm really excited for today. We're going to be talking about a topic that I think is of utmost importance in the work that we do in mental health. And I am excited to have my two colleagues here with me today, Dr. Frank Goritz and Skyler Moore, who's a registered mental health counseling intern. And welcome. And would you take a moment to say a little bit about who you are, what your background is, what you do? Skyler, would you mind starting us off, and then we'll pass the mic to Frank?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. I'm Skyler. I'm a registered mental health counseling intern. I really love working with children, adolescents, and teens, and even young adults around college age, but I'll work with a wide range of ages. I like working with LGBTQ youth, obviously. It's part of what we're passionate about here. But I do have a lot of experience working with people on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum. So I do have a lot of passion about that, caring for neurodivergent youth and making sure that they get the space that they need to be themselves, but also the very detailed care that they need for their own specific needs.
Thank you. And Dr. Goritz?
Yeah, I'm Dr. Frank Goritz. I have been in clinical practice for about 8 years now. I am a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida, and I'm also a licensed professional counselor in the state of Georgia. I primarily work with minority stress, anxiety, depression, trauma, and substance use. And I do work with a variety of age groups because I do believe that everybody across the lifespan can be impacted by these issues, including substance use, even if you're not the one who is struggling with substance use yourself, but you have a family member who is struggling. So I've had a great enriching career so far in being able to help folks navigate these presenting concerns. And it's an honor to continue to do that. Part of why I'm here as well is because I do have a strong passion and experience working with LGBTQIA plus community members, especially youth as well, who are navigating really complex aspects of their identities and experiences. And so I'm happy to dive more into that today.
Excellent. Yeah. So that's going to be our topic for today, is like the importance of creating safe spaces for LGBTQIA youth because they are in a higher risk bracket for mental health concerns than other folks. Not that other folks don't have, challenges, but what we know statistically is that they're higher risk for like elevated dangers for this population. And like maybe we can start off kind of talking about that in terms of statistics. What are some of the statistics in regards to mental health? Let's start with like suicidality. I know it's kind of a big, heavy topic, but it's important that we're able to talk about it. I think there's a myth that if we talk about it, that we're going to increase its likelihood, but that is not the case. By talking about it, we bring more awareness and we reduce stigma so that people can reach out and ask for help. How do the statistics for LGBTQIA youth differ in this category from other youth and adolescents?
Yeah, national data shows us that LGBTQIA teens think about and attempt suicide at a much higher rates than their peers, and acceptance in safe spaces dramatically reduce that risk. But some information from the Youth Risk and Behavior Surveys, around 22% of high school students seriously considered suicide in the past year, and around 10% reported a suicide attempt. We also have some information from the Trevor Project. I was blown away when I was doing some research. I already knew that the stats were very high, but even I was surprised to find that roughly 1 in 3 LGBTQIA youth ages 13 to 24 report seriously considering suicide in the past year. So we already know that this is an issue, but even I was surprised by just how much this is affecting children. So around 10 to 12% report at least one suicide attempt in the past year. Specifically for our transgender and non-binary youth, they consistently show higher rates of suicidal ideation and attempts than some of the cisgender LGBTQ youth. And this is also information coming from the Trevor Project. So it's very important that we are aware of these statistics so that we do know more about the risks, because these are really high numbers and it is affecting a lot of people in our community.
Yeah, the extremely high numbers. Dr. Goritz, what do you think is a contributing factor for those numbers to be so much higher than in prevalence in the general population?
Absolutely. So there's a term that's called microaggressions that I think are really important for us to consider in this context. So according to Daryl Wing Sue, there are 3 different types of microaggressions, and that includes micro insults. So when folks are directly experiencing insults about maybe a minoritized identity they have or a minoritized experience that they are facing. There's also micro assaults where folks are literally being assaulted because of their identities. And there's micro invalidations in which folks are being consistently invalidated by the systems that they are immersed in. So when you walk around, everywhere around you and you feel absolutely invalidated about your identities because everywhere you go, as of right now, especially, anti-LGBTQA plus politics and rhetoric, nearly 90% of LGBTQA plus young people report that these types of laws and policies cause a lot of stress and anxiety. And because of that too, I can only imagine the reality of many LGBTQA plus youth who don't respond to these surveys and might be navigating suicidality and anxiety silently without even, reporting it to anyone, which is why if we're going to combat micro invalidations, which are the systemic invalidations, we need to combat that with safe spaces.
Yeah. Thank you for going into that with such detail. I think people are familiar with the term microaggression, but maybe not the breakdown of how those show up and impact people. And certainly the systemic issues are of great importance, especially here. We're in Florida. All of us are in Florida.
Yes.
And we've certainly been seeing that happen on a systemic level within the educational environments, which we know for many youth, school happens to be a safe place for them. Not necessarily at home or in their community. And so if we start to make school feel like an unsafe place, that probably compounds the issue.
Yeah.
So I know, in addition to suicidality, which obviously is a big thing, but there's also something called non-suicidal self-harm. So a lot of teens and adolescents turn to these types of maladaptive coping mechanisms, not so much with the intent of ending their lives, but they're utilizing it to feel something different, or find some kind of temporary anesthesia from what they are feeling. Can we talk a little bit about that and how that impacts this population of youth as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We found that studies of LGBTQIA adolescents often find higher rates of that non-suicidal self-harm, with many reported self-harming behaviors. Some of those might be cutting, burning, hitting themselves were some of the most prevalent in these studies
Mhm.
as a way to cope with this intense emotional pain. I am doing something that I can feel physically because the emotions are so big and so overwhelming, I don't know what to do with them. Um, so for the non-suicidal self-harm, it's also more common in youth who experience obviously bullying, family rejection, and identity-based discrimination. So those
Mm.
are the three main things that can be a huge contributor to someone seeking out some non-suicidal self-harm behaviors. But why this matters clinically is it's often used to regulate these overwhelming emotions like shame or dysphoria or rejection. And we want the youth to have better, healthier coping mechanisms because all of their emotions are valid. We want to have safe spaces for them to be processed, for them to be in a safe space where it can be, you know, verbalized and processed. Um, so even when there are some LGBTQ youth that say they are not wanting to die or not trying to die through some of these behaviors, non-suicidal self-harm in itself is still associated with a higher risk of later suicide attempts. So going
Mhm.
back to suicidality, even if their intent is to not fully complete suicide, this is still
Yeah.
a big risk for what
Oh,
we
yeah.
might see later down the line too.
Huge risk. And so like so much health dangers in general, from infection to like long-term damage, depending upon, what they're utilizing to do that. And um, yeah, I appreciate your information on that topic and really pulling it back to say, like, yes, even though they're not intending to, they're still at a higher risk because they're already in this like place of suffering. Um, so, what would you say helps to create a safe space or place for youth to be able to express what's truly going on for themselves? Because I think that's part of it. They might express some of it, but they may not express the big truth of everything that's happening, if that makes any sense.
Well, I think about our fight or flight systems quite a bit when it comes to this, right? Because I think about when we don't feel safe, our sympathetic nervous system is going to flare up and it's going to cause us to feel on guard, unsafe. It's going to cause us to feel really wary and scared of the environment around us, right? Which causes us to react in a number of ways. And I would even add to that many methods of non suicidal self injury um, also connect with the fight or flight response, as well as like the freeze and fawn responses that people can experience with their sympathetic nervous system, especially if they're trying to maybe escape a painful emotion. That's quite possible. And when we have our parasympathetic nervous activated, it's because our body and our mind together are like, oh, we can relax here. This is safe. We feel good here. And that, I think, is part of the key as to what we could be creating as families, but as well as therapists as well, in holding together, group support where we have other folks who, at first, if we're around folks who are like us, but we don't know them, we might experience a sympathetic nervous system reaction of like, who are all these people, right? I don't know where I am. But the more that we reinforce with positive affirmation, with engagement, with collaboration, right? With teamwork and sharing, right? And especially projects where we can have fun, right? That in itself can cause the sympathetic nervous system to go, okay, we're tripping a little bit. So let's relax a little bit. And I think allows us to be able to let go a little bit. And I think even most importantly, because for so many of our queer youth as well, that it can be really hard to express ourselves. Our parasympathetic nervous system can allow us to express ourselves more easily because we're in a space where that's witnessed and it's embraced and it's celebrated. And we actually really need more of that now that I'm saying that out loud. It's not even just the spaces where folks can feel comfortable, but it's spaces where folks can feel celebrated.
I love that discrimination between the two. It's kind of like the difference between surviving and thriving, right? Like, okay, yeah, like it's safe for you to feel comfortable, but if you're celebrated, then, that's amplified. And there's something else that you said about like the parasympathetic nervous system and just like getting into that rest and digest mode. And I think if we're engaging people creatively, create the different creative outlets that we have, whether it's drawing, painting, drumming, movement, right? All of this activates that we get into that flow state. And that's where like our creative genius really shines. We're able to access information that would otherwise be inaccessible to us in like ease, in a state of ease, right? But if we're in the fight or flight mode, we're not able to access the best parts of our ideas and problem solving and all of that kind of stuff because we're too stressed to be worried about those things. It's not as important as surviving.
100%. And I would even add to that too, that I think many of our youth today across various identities aren't offered the space to really engage with and connect with their five senses. The five senses that really help us connect to the world and help us establish a sense of safety. I think back to cave people who had to rely on their five senses to get by and feel safety. But because so many of our youth, I think, are bombarded by, pressure from school and family and are on survival mode all the time, that they can't even take a minute to notice beautiful colors, soothing sounds, right? Tactile sensation of like clay or anything like that allows us to be able to like settle down and go, oh, we can be in the here and now. If I talk to any teenager today, I have a hard time identifying any teenager who's my client who's saying that they are able to tap into the here and now.
That it's a really challenging thing to do, I think, for many of us in modern society. We're so obviously we're meeting here on the screen today for the benefit of this podcast, but so much of our everyday activity happens through this like synthetic device, this plastic, right? We're engaging, but we're engaging in a way that like, yeah, we can see things and we can hear things, but it's not smell, it's not taste, it's not the felt sense of something, being enveloped by something in nature, if you will. And the creative process certainly can help people tap into that. So what do you think people could be doing at home with like families, right? If a family is able to identify, like, I think this is going on for my child, they haven't brought it to my attention yet. How could a family create a safe space to have that conversation where you're tapping into that rest digest mode while facilitating the conversation, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think trying to actively in your mind think about choosing acceptance over rejection, especially when we're trying to navigate these unknowns of if a child isn't fully expressing themselves yet, just trying to really meet them where they're at, having a lot of patience, having openness, but maybe also having some gentle, like, curiosity, paying attention to how are you expressing yourself in the home? What are some maybe things that are coming up in topics of conversation that could help someone feel more comfortable to talk about these things? Because the research shows that family acceptance is one of the strongest protective factors. Just having some general positive affirmations and genuine warmth towards the youth by saying, we love you, we're here, we're listening. That itself could be applied for anybody, but especially for LGBTQIA youth, just having that without beginning to touch upon maybe some of the more, vulnerable topics can, like we talked about earlier, help their nervous system to say, okay, I am loved, I'm being listened to. It is safe for me to be able to, talk about these things. And then in creating an affirming home for individuals that might start to come out and be having that process, what we can be doing at home is respecting their names, respecting pronouns that they want to use, respecting their clothing and their individual expression of themselves. Being able to let them experiment with what do they want to do? How do they want to be seen? And fostering a safe environment so that way they feel comfortable in the home to do that, and then they can express themselves outside of the home. Um, Removing shaming to their identity. So, like I said, just that acceptance. An example might be, gendering clothing or colors and stuff like that, saying you can't because this, you can't because that. Um, Allowing them to fully be themselves because labels can be great, but also labels could be putting them in a box. So allowing them to fully express themselves and experiment with whatever they might need to. But also giving them a place at home where they can feel like they can decompress, especially if outside of our homes, it doesn't feel like they are in a place where they can relax, going to school or just being out in the public. So once they return home, we want to be able to help the kids know that, hey, this is a space where you can decompress, you can be yourself, and we're here for you to be there for you. So yeah, just having that open curiosity, being able to, you know, give the kids warmth and allow themselves to express themselves slowly and let them be comfortable in their own time.
I think that part's really important. Like you had mentioned the word experimentation. And I think that is super important. Like if a child says this is how they're identifying today, making sure that you're like, great, whatever you tell me, that's what I'm going to go with until you tell me something differently. Because sometimes kids are kind of figuring themselves out, and they might be working towards something. They haven't quite figured it out yet, or at least I've seen that in kids that I've worked with, teens that I've worked with, where at first they kind of say, well, this is I'm bi, right? And then they later on fully shift and say, no, I'm this is who I really am. And like just giving them that space to go through that developmental identity arc. That identity changes. It's not a fixed thing, even in terms of like our identities across the lifespan. It shifts and changes. And so we don't want to put people in a box and say, well, you told me you were this, and now you're telling me you're that. Yeah, it changed. And that's okay. If we can be accepting of that, then people can feel more comfortable to figure themselves out. Because in youth, sometimes we're questioning. There's a lot of confusion of like, who am I really? Who am I? What are what's important to me versus what's important to my parents, and what's important to society, what society is telling me who I am or what I'm supposed to be. So I just love that emphasis on the experimentation and the space to grow and change.
Yeah, absolutely. And then bouncing off of what you said too, the flexibility that we need to have, the fluidity, because things can be very fluid, sexuality and gender can be very fluid. Um, and the coming out process can already be difficult enough for some of these individuals. That's why, personally, with some of the people that I've worked with, they want to maybe wait until they've figured things out more. They have difficulty fitting with a specific identity or label because it's already hard enough to come out. What if I have to come out again? What if I have to say, hey, now I'm wanting to be this? And there's already so stigma about, people questioning, well, do you really know who you are and what you like? And then them having to, accept that, yeah, I am still figuring that out as a human, and I am still figuring out what I like and what I want to express. So yeah, being able to be along with them for that journey because it is their journey. They are figuring themselves out, and we can just be the safe vehicles to help them along that journey.
Did you want to add something, Dr. Goritz?
Absolutely, because I think one of the biggest things that, when parents ask their kids, how do you know who you are, right? And like, you don't know who you are, etc. What I think a lot of kids are trying to say to their parents is that you're not giving me permission to learn or to know. And if we don't think that our kids rely on our parents for permission, even in the most stubborn archetype of kids and adolescents, I think we're sorely mistaken. There's so much that we rely on our caregivers for when it comes to emotional approval. And at least initially, right? So I think about Erikson, right? So I'm going back to human growth and development. And I think about like trust versus mistrust and autonomy versus doubt, actually. And I think, we are going through psychosocial development as we are maturing and becoming our own person. But what I think Erikson didn't know or realize is the idea that, well, we're just assuming that this person you're describing has not had an interruption in this idea of who they are or who they're supposed to be. And so I wonder about how much that process actually resets quite a bit when we are encountering a new phase of our identity that we are starting to really question, especially when it questions the core beliefs of what a family is saying, right? When we think about identity, I think back then we weren't really thinking about identity as complex as the way we are now, right? And even though gender identity, right, and gender expression has been an ongoing fluidity for decades, for generations, nobody really was talking about it because we didn't want to. It was too scary. And maybe what we also didn't want to admit is that it starts a whole new psychosocial process for us when we are getting into that type of process of self-exploration, which means that for the parents who are listening, our kids need all the support they can get to be able to explore new ideas of themselves that conflict from Barbie versus Hot Wheels that they see on TV, right? And I'm saying that as a very 90s kid because, in the commercials, when you're as early as 2 years old, it was very clear what you were supposed to do, right? You look to your right and there's a kitchen set with like fake carrots and like fake frying pans and all of these things that you could like stand in, or there's like these like blue and orange like cars that you're supposed to be playing with on like a racetrack, right? Or I don't know why parents and playmakers were so obsessed with their kids getting into construction, but like the male kids were like encouraged to play with like plastic wrenches and nails, and I'm sitting here going like, but we don't even know how to use these things, and we would never know until we're like 37. So like, what are we really doing? But it's those messages, right? The messages that create these archetypes that maybe actually don't fit these kids. And when kids are exposed to these things, maybe some kids can identify with it. They go, oh, cool, I don't know what a wrench is, but I'll play with it. And on the other hand, there's kids who are sitting there going, oh, I don't relate to any of these things. What's out there for me?
Yeah.
And that is where I think our parents need to be paying attention, where it's like it's not the kids who are different. It's the lack of imagination in terms of what we are considering when it comes to what our kids are into and who our kids are and who our kids become if they realize that like having a blue bedroom doesn't really fit who they are anymore and they want to dye their hair pink, right? How do we adjust to those changes?
Yeah, I think you're bringing up an interesting like parallel process, because when your child is going through their own identity development and it does not conform to your ideas or what you've always thought to be true, that forces you to then reevaluate and go through your own change as well, of like, okay, I now have to reflect and see what I learn as a human being all this time, right? Is that what is true and accurate? So much of our beliefs are learned constructs, and sometimes those constructs conflict with the newer generation, and that throws people back into their own, identity crisis, if you will, as you were describing with like Erickson's theory. So re-questioning some of those things, I think it's important that we do question, like, okay, where is this coming from? Why do I believe this to be true or accurate? And is it really, or is it causing harm? Can I change it? If I do change that constructed belief, will that alleviate some of the pressure that I'm putting on myself, but also that I'm putting on my loved ones?
Especially like if I'm putting on my kids, because I think also for the parents who are listening, your kids are changing all the time, no matter what you do or you think or what you feel, your kids are going to change anyway. And what they need the most right now is you to be on board, to be on that ride with them, because life is already a wild ride. And like, parents, think back to that wild ride you had. Why would you want your kid to go through that alone?
Yeah. What are some resources for parents that they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. I was not expecting this. Where can they turn to for support to start to learn different information in how to best support their kids, and maybe even participate in some support of like grieving the loss of the child that they thought they were going to, like the child they thought their child was going to become, versus the child, they autonomously decided, this is who I am, right? And it doesn't necessarily align with the parents' vision of what they had for their child in the future. And honestly, I mean, I think that happens across the board, no matter what.
Oh, yes.
But in this case, I think it can be particularly painful in families, and it can be, really ostracizing in terms of like family dynamics.
I think PFLAG is one of the most amazing resources out there, because, it's a support space for parents where they can, question, but they can support each other, and we can all grow together as well when it comes to encountering something new that maybe we don't understand about our kids. When we don't know something, the best thing we can do is seek out folks who might know. And PFLAG is the perfect space for that. And that's also why kids deserve their own support spaces too, because while they're going on these rides alone, they may have questions of their own too that they don't feel comfortable asking their parents, but they feel comfortable asking each other, or through listening to other stories, they go, oh, yes, I've been through that too, and I never knew what to do.
Mm.
And that's why I love safe spaces for kids as well, where, yes, we have some strong support spaces for parents like PFLAG, but we need way more as well for the kids who are going through it, because they're still trying to figure it out as they go too.
Yeah, absolutely. Which we're going to talk a little bit about a safe space that you're creating for teens to come participate in. But before we do that, I wanted to talk a little bit more about, what are some preventative and protective factors, mechanisms that we as individuals, families, and in the larger community can do to be more supportive and but be a safe person for folks that are not feeling very safe in the world.
Yeah, I touched on it a little bit earlier, but going back to that family acceptance and connectedness, the kids who feel connected to their parents and caregivers are going to feel safer. Using correct names and pronouns, supporting their identity, but also affirming school and community environments are really important for what we can be doing more in the community. Presence of, clubs like the Gay Straight Alliance, things that are in schools that let kids know, hey, like this is here for you. We need more inclusive policies, anti-bullying enforcements to protect the children's mental health, respect for gender identity and expression, um, and more of those safe, inclusive spaces, not just within the home, but also outside of the home. So, with families, being there for themselves, but what can we do as individuals? The same as families, treating people with respect, listening to them, being open to hearing their stories, because that's also very important. Being able to just hear and see these individuals and be able to hear and see them, that helps them feel like, yeah, of course I matter. This is my expression. This is my life that I want to be able to live to the fullest. And we want to encourage that. Things that we can do, there might be little signs that we can put out in the community that let people know, hey, it's safe. I personally love collecting little pins. One of the pins that I personally own is a rainbow flag pin that says, "You are safe with me." So sometimes being that beacon out in public to let people know, hey, this is a safe space. For those of us that can, being the voice for the people who cannot have a voice. So doing something like this for the people that are scared to come out, being able to talk about why this is so important, being able to help make our therapy spaces also safe for them too. Having in our bio like, hey, I have worked with this population, you will be safe here, because getting some resources can already be very scary and vulnerable. People want to make sure they're going to the right people for resources.
Yeah,
I
so
had,
true.
individuals come to me, and they wanted to make sure that it would be a safe space, like, this isn't going to be you're trying to change who I am or trying to push any sort of thing onto me. And I was like, absolutely not. This is the space for you to be yourself as an individual. But that just shows how important it is. And I've gotten positive feedback in my personal counseling experience out in the field of having that in my bio of, yes, this is a safe space for you. I've had people come to me more that are specifically in this population because they felt seen already and because I was willing to
Right.
put that out there, which is kind of bonkers, but that in itself could be seen as controversial by us out loud and proud saying, hey, I stand with these people. I am gonna, be this safe space for them. So it's important for us as allies, as teachers, as
Mhm.
counselors, as communities to be able to also help create those protective spaces for LGBTQIA youth.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear about that, and I think it's we've seen like people who will say like, I'm not going to go here because of that. And so what you're saying is truly resonant, that like even in the therapy space where, ethically we are supposed to uphold, certain, the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm, right? And if we're not causing harm, that means we are accepting of everyone as they are, exactly as they are. And that isn't always the case. And I think that is why people seek out to know, is this going to be an environment that is going to be respectful and I'm going to be okay there? Especially if you're coming because you already feel oppressed in some way, you already feel unseen, you already feel erased or attempted to be erased, and ridiculed for who you are. You want to be able to come to a space that's going to honor you exactly as you are and allow you to be vulnerable with all of that. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what the two of you are partnering together to collaborate on and to offer this fall for this particular population.
Yeah, so we've got our Power in Pride group. So this group is all about facilitating that safe and supportive space for LGBTQIA teens as they're exploring their identity and self-expression. Our group will be starting in September 5th to November 28th, Saturdays from 11:30 to 1. And we want people to come in and be able to find that sense of community, because we talk about community and how important it is, and it really, really is important. Being able to see yourself and other people, feel like you're not alone, especially as you're navigating things that can be very overwhelming. So in our expressive arts group, we're going to get together. We're going to be able to facilitate some art activities, exploring our identities, things that we might go over, like some themes and topics, our self-esteem, our pride, and our colors. We'll be able to decorate our own little individual pride flags and be able to do that in the group. The masks that we wear, sometimes, that difficulty of, when do I express myself and how can I express myself? Navigating the world around us, amplifying our voices, and then visualizing the future that we want. How do we ask for help? How do we be able to keep facilitating safe spaces outside of here? But starting within that group, being able to be creative and expressive through art and that collaboration to make that safe space for these teens.
I love that. I love that. And when is this starting and how can people sign up? Like, any other information you want to share about it?
There is a research opportunity. So when it comes to this group in particular, every other session that we have, we're going to ask our members to write a poem about their experience. It could be a simple poem. It could be a complex poem. And we're going to compile those poems into research that we want to share with the communities at large about why these groups are important. And so if you're interested in having if you as a kiddo wanting to join this group, or as an adolescent joining this group want to get involved with that, you certainly can.
Wonderful. And when does it start?
It starts September 5th. September 5th from 11:30 to 1 p.m. and it's going to go until November 28th. So like I said, every Saturday in our Florida Art Therapy office space. You can find more information by calling 239-297-7099, or you can email our office. You can email Liza, Liza, at floridaarttherapyservices.com. So that way you can get registered, get signed up, and that way we know you're ready to go.
Awesome. I think that It is a wonderful opportunity for folks to have a supportive experience. It's happening on a Saturday morning, so it's not going to conflict with other school or extracurriculars. And the other thing I think is it creates an environment that is just for them, just for them, which feels really important, right? It's not for anybody else. And earlier, Frank, you had talked about that difference between just being accepted and being celebrated. And I think, what you guys are creating is that opportunity to be in a group where kids are celebrated for who they are, exactly as they are. And that's really a beautiful, beautiful thing. For folks in our community, we're in Fort Myers. For folks in our community, what are some of the resources that are available for youth, the LGBTQIA youth? I know we have a few.
Yeah, like Dr. Goretz mentioned, we have PFLAG. We have some locations in Fort Myers and in Naples around here. Visuality of Southwest Florida is also another great organization. We also have ALSO Youth. They're operating out of Sarasota, but they're starting to expand, and they have, some anti-bullying education that they're trying to promote and create more safe spaces. Parenting with Pride is another website that parents can go to. And then, visiting those websites, like even, the Trevor Project, as we mentioned earlier, with some statistics, they always have some really great, not only education and awareness, but they also have a compiled list of some really good resources.
Mm-hmm. And their hotline, which is a great resource for folks if you're in crisis. And I'll make sure to put all of those links in the show notes. Any other final closing thoughts about why this work is important and why we need to focus on it, not just during the month of June, which, if you're familiar, June happens to be Pride Month, which is lovely, and we want to celebrate that. But why is it important to be bringing our attention and awareness to this all year long?
My answer for that is time. Time is the major reason, because I think with LGBTQA plus youth, they deserve the time and space to be able to explore who they are with pride. And, with anybody just in general, one thing that we're always going to remember is how we were treated by others. And so when it comes to our family as well, we want our kids to be able to look back and say, my parents supported me when I was at a pivotal point of my growth, because we don't realize that as adolescents that we're going through a pivotal point of growth. We're just sort of in it to wing it, right? At least that's how I felt, y'all. But when now that I'm looking back at my life and I'm 37, I'm sitting here going, oh, that was a big part of my life. And I feel grateful to the folks who were supportive to me when I maybe didn't even know I needed that support. So I feel like time is absolutely everything when it comes to why this is so important.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I think that, as we're talking about all the risks and stuff that we need to be aware of, for LGBTQIA plus teens, they aren't at higher risk because of who they are. They are at higher risk because of how they are being treated. And thankfully, that's something that we can change. So through those safer spaces, connection and, being affirming to them are these protective factors that are literally saving lives also. And they deserve more than survival. They deserve joy and creativity and connection to be able to be themselves. And when they feel accepted and supported, then it's just one small but very powerful way that we can create that safety. And our art therapy group is one way that we're trying to have a small drop in the bucket for our community to have that greater sense of safety and community.
Yeah, I love that. So for folks that might be listening and they might want to reach out to each of you, possibly to work with you individually, or maybe they have some additional questions, or would like for you to share some information in another capacity, what's the best way for them to reach you, Skyler? Do you have an
Yes.
email?
Yeah, you can reach me at Skyler, Skyler, at floridaarttherapyservices.com. That's the best way to get in contact with me, to be able to collaborate or ask for more information.
Perfect. And how about you, Dr. Goritz?
And I'm Frank at floridaarttherapyservices.com. So you could definitely reach out to me there. And I'd love to collaborate with you and be present with you as we support your family.
I love that. Thank you guys so much for being willing to bring attention and share about this topic here on the podcast, but also for all the energy and dedication and thought that you've put into creating this group. All the creative interventions, the creative research, which allows participants to really be able to express their experience in a creative way, but also contribute to why this is so important that we do create these safe spaces. And so thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and close us out. And, for those of you that are listening, please rate, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And please share this with anybody you think might be, beneficial for them to hear. We appreciate your support.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Creative Psychotherapist. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For show notes, downloads, and additional resources, head over to the website at www.creativeclinicianscorner.com. Thanks for listening to this episode of The